Hi guys, welcome to episode 4 of Research with me. In this episode, we're going to be covering over conclusions, how to talk about how your literature or what you've written can be developed and expanded on. If anything in today's episode does not make sense, that is probably because you've missed episode 1 to 3 on this, in which I go through my EPQ piece, which is focusing on the research question, in philosophy of mind, does type A theory work as a model for the mind? This is a still working title and still definitely a working paper so far, and so please keep that disclaimer in mind, but I'll walk you through the entire process of doing so. And today we're going to be covering the conclusion and also what I think is the bigger argument for the type A against the type A theorists instead of the multiple realizability objection. Okay, so let's just dive straight into it. So then in this section of the paper, I talk about what the bigger problem for the type A theorists is, which I think is the explanatory gap proposed by David Levin. And so then I start off by giving a quick introduction to what it is, which is the explanatory gap is a concept which posits that there's a space, there's a distance between the physical and the mental that cannot be explained by any physicalist theory. And so, as I've done many times throughout this paper, and I've shown through many episodes, one of the best way to explain philosophical theories in a way that's very accessible and understandable, the best way to illustrate said arguments is through giving examples. For example, in this scenario, I talk about how our ancestors believed that lightning was God's wrath. However, we realize that lightning equals the natural electric discharge in clouds, and it seems impossible to argue otherwise. And then if we take the example of pain equals CF fiber stimulation, it appears we also have an identity. However, with electric discharge and lightning, we can see the physical story of how the friction in the clouds cause the electric discharge, and this charge is attracted to the opposite charge on the ground, thus causing a electric discharge imbalance, therefore causing lightning, as they're the same thing. However, in the case of pain, a physical story is missing. We have no reason for why CF fibers equals pain. There's an explanatory gap, and thus their relationship is completely opaque, and there's no reason and no explanation for why the type A theorist comes up with this theory. And because there's this explanatory gap, this manifests itself in its lack of explanatory power, which is something that I explain later. So it's really important to link all your ideas together in this form, like how I link the explanatory gap, which is a bigger issue, as I've already disposed of multiple realizability theory. This is a bigger issue because not only does it show that there's not a physical connection between the two, this in fact leads to the result and the effect of the fact that it has a lack of explanatory power, which I show later, such as explaining subjective experience and things of that sort. So it's really important to link all your arguments together so that it has a good flow and it has a good sense of logic to it. And then so I say that for example here, that the explanatory gap manifests itself being unable to account for consciousness and causation in type A theory. So this one, I just bring up the fact that there just seems to be no brain state to be correlated with the mental state of pain. Or is pain even a mental state? Consciousness more specifically. Is it that all these mental states all constitute to each other to create consciousness? What exactly of the pain state, the mental state of pain, what exactly of that contains qualia? What of that contains subjective experience, the things that Nagel touches upon? And this is an objection that is brought by Bloch and Flanagan and many other philosophers. And so and that links to the bigger issue of why does pain equal CF fibers? Why can't CF fibers be causing any other sensation, or why can't pain be caused by any other fiber or any other neuro connection or any other brain state for that matter? There is no physical explanation, and so there's no explanation for why certain things are the way it is. It seems like a logical theory, and it does logically make sense, but it just lacks that explanatory power to make it a theory that's successful. Type A theory could be absolutely right, but there's just a certain feeling, it could be true that mental states are equal to brain states, but there's no explanation for why. And that's what's missing. It could be true, and this is what I point to. For example, I I also add to the fact where it does not explain why two people can have the same physical experience but different mental experiences. There's just a lot of missing gaps in type identity theory. And then I also move on to the issue of causation, as previously in, I think, episode 2, or it might be episode 1, where I go over how we challenge the epiphenomenalist. Now, we say that the epiphenomenalist cannot account for causation. The actual same issue arises here once we examine the explanatory gap, and therefore we can reach a deeper reflection onto type identity theory in which it faces the exact same problems that it once rejected in the epiphenomenalist. So it's really important to sometimes maybe start off with something that you go against, or a certain idea or presupposition that you have, or a pre-existent idea, such as, epiphenomenalists think that epiphenomenalists do not account for causal relationships, but type identity theory does, blah, 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 and this is why I'm right. Now, the key important thing to focus here is that epiphenomenalism is wrong purely because it does not have a causal argument for why causal relations happen. Now, then you go through the entire process of multiple realizability, blah, 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 blah. And then when you finally get to the explanatory gap, you once link it back again to the fact that it faces the same demise the epiphenomenalist once faced that it proposed that the epiphenomenalist faced. So you're sort of setting up a trap. So the epiphenomenalist, the type identity theorist, has already gone against the epiphenomenalist because it doesn't show a causal relationship. And then once realizing the explanatory gap, then the type identity theorists face the same consequence of having no causal relationship that can be explained here, and thus type identity theory must fail, as it's already argued against epiphenomenalism, and it follows the same fate, and therefore it must fail too. And then I expand on how it has a lack of explanatory power, blah blah blah, and that then I go back, once again back to, I think it was episode 1, where I talk about one of the main arguments for type identity theory is Occams Razor. Now, it's important to not forget the components of the introduction or the start of your paper, because they should all link together. It should be a cohesive working essay and document. In this case, where essentially I bring back in Occams Razor and use it to go against type identity theory, something that it used to support. Just like with epiphenomenalism, I once again use the explanatory gap to go against the type identity theorist. I use one of its strengths and turn it into one of its weaknesses. Like in this case, I talk about how CF fibers equals pain, but beliefs may equal B fibers, and then we can have an infinite amount of mental states, infinite amount of brain states, and there's just so many different entities that it actually is not supported by Occams Razor anymore. And so you see how this is a useful and very convincing technique to incorporate previous strengths and turn them actually into disadvantages. And then I move on to how type identity theory can be benefited because it's not a physicalist theory. I go back to, once again at hand, that is a physicalist theory. It's important to not get always too bogged down at the nitty-gritty details and realize the bigger scope of things and how this theory doesn't actually, it's really easy to get into the rabbit hole of blah, 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 multiple realizability, here, explanatory gap, but it's really important to go back to the main idea that we're trying to find the model for the mind. And if type identity theory is not a good physicalist perspective in the first point because it can't be tested empirically, what's the point of doing all this debate at all? And then I go on to other arguments that I don't think are necessary to go through here, and then finally I end with this argument where this conclusion, and the conclusion is important because it's a good summary of everything, wraps everything together, and this is where I think your argument really shines through. An important thing that I failed to do in this is to explain what further research can be done. For example, in this case, I've mentioned all these issues of causal relationships, and can't be empirically tested with type identity theory. Maybe I can bring up the fact that emergentism may solve all these issues, and further research on emergentism may lead to more development in the idea of type identity theory. And so I think that's how you should do your conclusion. And hopefully through this episode today, you've learned how to do a conclusion, how to wrap up your argument, how to link everything together, have a cohesive paper. And I think that will really help you in writing a really, really good research paper, because often people forget to link everything together. They have a bunch of separate points, but not a very cohesive argument. And I hope this episode has taught you how to build one. So thank you for watching, and please subscribe.